Okay, let's start. Okay. So today we are going to talk about writing your test report. I understood that there was some confusion about the test report and what you are going to submit by the 19th. So it's what you're going to submit by the 19th is the test plan. The test plan is your research questions and the plan of the experiment you are going to do only. Yes, the test plan.
So could you repeat that one more time?
I will repeat it today. It will be also explained in detail. If you would have paid more attention during the lecture, you would have noticed this. If you would have bothered to see the lecture recording, you would have also been able to see this by yourselves. But that's okay. We're going to repeat it also again today. And after you do the experiment, you get the results. Then you submit the final report, which you will be graded on, and then you will be able to also add the analysis and the results of your experiment. But for now, this before the experiment, we're going to write the test plan. So if we look at this, we are now here in week 6. And oh no, we are still in week. Are we in week 5 or in week 6? No. We're in week 5. 6. Oh yeah, we just started 6. Yeah, of course. So the plan is now that you are now going to start testing. So this is you can use the holiday time also to continue your testing, which is not ideal, but that's if you want to have everything done in time. You had a question?
No, it was just a remark about how school officially doesn't want us to work on anything.
No. Yeah. But you can do the test this week if you want.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, you can. But you can also do it.
Yeah.
You don't want to do it.
No, I don't want you to work in the holiday. That's not what I want. Okay. Shh. This is the planning. We are now here. So today you're going to get the lecture about the writing the test plan and the test report. You're going to actually write the test plan now. And the test plan, a big part of it is the research questions and the sub-questions and the measurement questions. This you should already have by now. This already have the test plan. So it's not a lot of work. The only thing you need to determine is for each of the measurement questions, what's the experiment you're going to do and how you're going to make these measurements. So this you will have to write and submit by midnight on the 19th. And on the 20th, you have a lecture in your roster. And this one we will use to discuss your test plans. So we'll all sit here or in whatever room, and I'm going to walk to each group. We'll look at your test plan, and we will discuss whether it is good or not, and whether it needs adjustment. This is very important because usually the test plans are really terrible. And then by getting some feedback, you make sure that you don't have an experiment that's completely pointless, and then you get a report in the end that will not get you anywhere, and you fail the course. So in order to get a good grade, this feedback moment is really essential. So write your test plans, submit them by the deadline, and then on the next day we are going to sit together and discuss them. On the 19th, there will also be a lecture about analyzing the results. This you will use when you write your final report. Okay? Clear? Yes. Good. Okay, these two slides should be very familiar by now. So these are the characteristics of conducting a usability test, and we are today going to talk about writing the report. So it's going to be observe and record, then you do the analysis, and then you report your results and make recommendations and conclusions. Also, before you conduct your experiment, you will need to make the plan, which also we will talk about today. Again, this is the scheme of how you do the test. You start with the problem descriptions, research questions, and then from the research question, you get these sub-questions. And then for each sub-question, so I only have it here because it doesn't fit. I only have it for the first sub-question. You have the measurement questions. What that is also here, you have measurement questions, and for here, and then you make the measurements. Here you do the experiment. So this is before the experiment, the blue part. Then you do the test, and then here after that you do the structuring and analyzing the data you measured, and then you make conclusions and you write it in your report. Okay? All right. Before we talk about the report, I have some final remarks about preparing your experiment. So let's see. The experiment is usually kind of a hectic time because you have lots of participants coming, participants going. You're writing things down. You want to keep things organized. So if you can automate as much as possible, then this would be very good for you. And now we have these Google forms that you can have all the questions answered on like a computer. Before, everybody used to have paper forms for surveys. So this already automates a lot of the work for you. If things are automated, so if, for example, the instructions is part of, you can see them on the screen. You don't need to give people instructions on hand or like explain things to them. Then this also is very nice because everything is repeatable, and you know that every participant gets exactly the same steps and exactly the same information, which keeps the results in the end consistent. It's very important that you don't introduce a lot of variables in your experiment. Keep everything the same so that you can get also consistent results. So keep the descriptions short and everybody gets the same explanation. You have to decide what information that you will tell your participants. So the participants don't really need to know what you want to get. Because sometimes if you already tell this to the participants, you will influence the results. And sometimes by hiding these from the participants, you can get some interesting things. So there was one experiment where they wanted to see whether the handshake has an effect on the outcome of an interview. And then they had the participants, on the way to the interview, they would give him something, a cup to hold. So the person who was taking him to the interview is pretending that she needs to write something on a piece of paper. So she gave him or her a cup to hold. And then half the participants had a cold cup, and the other half had a warm cup. And then when they went to the interviewer and they gave him a handshake, the interviewer felt either their hand was cold or their hand was warm. And then they did the interview. And then what they noticed is that if the person's hand was cold, then usually they got a worse score for the interview than if their hand was warm. But people who participated in the experiment did not know anything about the goal of the experiment, because that would influence the results. So by keeping the goal hidden, you can actually reach interesting findings. Have a seat. So don't tell the participants everything, only tell them the things that they need in order to complete your experiment. And then thank them from your heart and send them on their way, and then you can use the data to get your results that you want. Don't tell them which result you want to get. So for example, if you have your new design with the new features that you're adding and you're comparing it to the old design, try to avoid telling them, hey, there's the old app and there's the new app that we deliver, that we are making, and we want it to be really nice. Because then you're already influencing. If you're asking their opinion, what do you think about the app? You'll be like, okay, this guy's really nice. I don't want to make him sad. I will say that his app is really cool. So try to avoid having this influence on them. Just keep everything as neutral as possible. Tell them we are comparing these two apps and we want to see which one is better. So it is, here we see you can have, when the participant is participating in the experiment, they're always thinking about what exactly does the experimenter do, what am I supposed to do, and if you say anything that can influence them, then it's also can affect the outcome of the experiment. And this is also sometimes referred to as the Hawthorne effect, which means that sometimes by asking people for information, you don't get exactly their honest opinion. You get their opinion that is affected by what they're thinking. So another example is that if you ask people about, how many times they lie every day, and then everybody will say, oh, I never lie. I lie once a week. But then this is affected by their willing, because they want to hide something because it's not in their, basically they're not giving you the honest answer. So they're not giving you the honest answer. This is called the Hawthorne effect. And in order to be able to get the answers, the real answers, without having this effect play a role, you have to be really smart in how you collect the data. Okay. Be careful for your own body language. So if you give person like your version of the app and you look like this, and you give them the other version of the competing app and you look like this, then you're already giving them like hidden subliminal messages that, hey, this is what I want. There's a good version, there's a bad version, and maybe not that obvious, but in the things that you say, your body language, in the way you present things, you can already have an effect on what the users perceive. And your participants are not stupid. They can also notice many things that you can have only with your body language. A good example of that is the case of Clever Hans. I cannot read the German name. So Hans was a horse that can do calculations. He can know which day of the week it is. Wait, I have here a description exactly. So the scientist that was training Hans to do all these calculations was called Willem van Oosten. And what Hans can do, listen to this. So this horse can do additions, subtractions, multiplications, divisions. So the horse can divide numbers. He can tell time, keep track of the calendar, differentiate musical notes. The horse could read. The horse could spell. The horse could understand German. The horse can answer a question that says, if the 8th day of the month comes on Tuesday, what is the date that follows Friday? Okay, so this is already very, very impressive for a horse. Because even I will have some challenges with these things. This was in 1904. And Hans, so the horse, would actually, so you ask him the question, and then the horse will start tapping his foot. So here we have an actual picture of Hans giving a demonstration. So you ask him the question, and then so what's like 8 divided by 4, and then you see like Hans will tap his foot once, twice, and then he will stop tapping, and then he will give you the correct answer. Okay? All right. So of course now we know that Hans did not do all these fantastic feats, but Hans almost always gave the correct answer. So how did Hans do that?
The scientist would go like that when he needed to keep tapping.
Yeah.
And when the horse had the correct answer, he'd go like, all right, and then he would go, see. And the horse would look at him. So when he was doing the weird leaning forward bit.
So you know the story.
Of course, I also know the Harford effect.
Okay.
I know both the stories.
Thank you. So the scientist was not aware of it. The scientist also was really believing that Hans knows how to do all these things. But what was happening is that when Hans was tapping his foot, the scientist and all the audience will be looking down at his foot and see him tapping. And then exactly when he reaches the correct answer, everybody looks up, and then the horse notices this, and then the horse stops tapping his foot. And that's how the horse almost always gave the correct answer. But again, the scientist did not know this. The audience, of course, did not want to help the horse, but the body language that they gave and their behavior influences the results of the experiment. So if the horse can figure this out, you keep in mind that what your human participants can figure out from your own body language. Okay. For your experiment team, keep the team size as small as possible. So if you have a large team, then you have a lot of organization. If one of the team members cannot come, then there will be a problem. You cannot run the experiment. So it's less effort to get everyone to the test. If you're doing this at work, all these employees need to get paid, so it's less expensive to have fewer people on your team. It's also less intimidating for your participant. If there's like 10 people in the room, then the participant will be like, what the hell is happening? And usually there are 2 members and the person who is taking the experiment. The members are the experimenter and the observer. So the people who did the test experiment in the second lecture already know this by now. The experimenter is the person who is basically talking to the participant, taking them through the steps, getting them to do all the things that they need to do, giving them the questionnaire. Basically, the person who runs the entire experiment. And the observer is just in the background. So the observer just keeps notes of what's happening, body language, behaviors, gestures, all the things that is not recorded in the experiment, but you actually need it. And if the participants give comments, verbal comments, then the observer also keeps track of what is being said. Combining these 2 tasks is difficult because the experimenter has to be consistent and neutral and make sure that everything goes in the specific amount of time that's required. And combining these tasks will make the experimenter task very difficult. So 2 people are an ideal setup for the team. Yes? Yeah. Yes? Good. So the steps, the usual steps on the day of the experiment, the participant will come, the guest, the participant will come. You welcome the participant, you give them a short introduction about what they're going to do. If they need to sign an agreement, if there is like something about private data that is going to be shared, the GDPR, sometimes you have to sign these things. So this is an opportunity to get them to do this in advance. And if they don't want to sign, yes, come in, it's okay. If they don't want to sign, then you don't need to run the experiment because that will be a waste of time. You cannot use the data. So have them sign it in advance. And if you have a questionnaire that they need to fill in before the test, then you can also have them fill that now. Sometimes you want to compare, you want to see if the opinion of the people change after they do your experiment. So you ask them for their opinion, then they do your experiment. Maybe they watch, you ask them about how much they want to give to charity. Then you show them a video about how much people are suffering in poor countries. And then you ask them how much they want to give to charity after they see this video. And then you see whether your video is increasing their willingness to give to charity or not. And then you have like 3 versions of the video. And then you see which version makes them want to pay more to charity the most. So you want to test the effectiveness of each of these videos. So you have this kind of experiment. And then you ask them for opinions before they watch it and after they watch it. So there's a post questionnaire after they do your experiment. Anyway, so you have them to fill in the questionnaire before the experiment, and then you give the instructions for the experiment you want to do. Check your checklist and see if you are. So you need to have a checklist to make sure that you have covered all steps of your experiment. After every scenario, so last lecture we talked about scenarios that you need to give your participant for the experiment that you're going to run. After every scenario, you can have a post-test questionnaire to see things to measure things that are specific to that scenario. And then after the entire experiment is done, you can have a post-experiment questionnaire. So in the end, you want to measure whatever you want to measure. You have this measurement in the end of the experiment. These are basically the steps for running the experiment. Okay. Okay. Everything's clear for running the experiment. After this, we're going to writing the report. Any questions about this part? Good. Okay. The test report consists of these components. And this basically will be your, what do you call it? These are the sections that you're going to have in your report. So there'll be introduction, a description of the project that you have. You will write your research questions and the plan for the experiment, results, and conclusions. And we're going to go through all these sections one by one. Hey, guys. Hey. So in the introduction, yeah, here you are doing like 2 projects. So you have to design a kind of system, and you are doing the test for the human-machine interaction. For this introduction, I want you to focus more on the testing part of your project, because this is the report you're writing for the human-machine interaction part. The introduction itself should include this storyline. So first you start with background information. If you are, so there's a group that wants to do the, let's think. Trying to think of a good example of the projects. Let's say that you're doing the tram thing for the drivers. Then your background information will be like, okay, in Holland, in the Netherlands, there is this many tram lines, there's this many tram workers, and there's a big problem because the logistics of planning everything is getting out of hand. You know, you make it sound like there is a big problem, so that is so that you need to solve it because you're now introducing a solution. So you start with some background information, number of trams, number of people doing it, and then you start explaining why is there a problem. So because it's such a big number, then people cannot keep up with all the changes. There's lots of challenges, and that's why there is now this main question that came out, like, can we make this any faster? Can we come up with a digital solution that can automate this process? And then, so this main question will be like in the direction of your research question. Not research questions here yet. We're having a separate section for this. After that, you're going to talk about your approach to answering this question. And this is going to be the usability study that you're going to make. So here you're going to have a short description of what kind of study we're going to read about in this report. So short summary of your test. And then the final part of the introduction is just a formality. So if someone wants to skip directly to a section that's important for them, you say that section 1 talks about etc., etc. Section 2 explains how the experiment is done. Section 3 analyzes the results. And that's the last part of the introduction. Then you will have a short description about your project, because then you're doing an experiment with the project, and if you don't write anything about the project beforehand, then the reader will be a little bit confused. So just keep it short, keep it to the point. If there are some screenshots or pictures of the prototype that you're making, then you can also include them here. So what's the system you have designed? Which problems do you want to tackle? What problems are you trying to solve? The main design goals, what you want to achieve with your product that you're designing, how the system will achieve these goals, and talk a little bit about the prototype that you have designed. Then we are going to go to the research questions. This we have already talked about many times, so this should be very clear. It was in the second lecture. You can also look back at the slides and the recordings. Basically, what are the main questions what's the main question that you want to answer? So the main research question, and then you divide the question into sub-questions so that you can answer each of these sub-questions to answer the main questions. And for each sub-question, you will decide how you're going to measure, what measurements are you going to take to answer each of these sub-questions. So this part should be really clear. And then we are going to talk, this is a very important part, so the planning of the test. So sometimes here, because you guys are limited on time and resources and money, maybe the test will not go very, very well. Maybe you will not get as many participants as you want. But the planning, everybody should do with the resources that they have. So I would focus a lot on the plan. And I want to see that your plan is done well. It's very important that you are really going to measure things that are going to answer your questions. And you're going to do it in a way that you don't influence the outcome of the experiment by the way you plan the experiment. So I would like you to put a lot of thinking into how you're going to plan your experiment. This is the most important part of this whole story. So how are you going, what's your experiment setup? How many sessions are you going to have? So if you're comparing two prototypes, you're going to have one session at least with one prototype and the other session with the other prototype, or two different conditions. Maybe there are multiple things that you want to test, so you'll have more than 2 sessions. You will have the old version and then prototype 1, prototype 2. So how many sessions you want to do and how many groups? So you can have one group test both prototypes. So you can have, you only have 5 people that's willing to take your experiment, and then you have them do the experiment with the first prototype and with the second prototype. But then imagine that the point of your system that you are testing is that they they learn something new. So maybe your system is like teaching people how to use a function in Photoshop. And then if you already test it with one condition, and then they already learned what you need them to learn, you cannot test the other condition because they already learned that thing. So you need to have a different user to test the other condition. Okay? So sometimes you cannot have the same participant do both conditions. You need to have two separate groups of participants. It's all dependent on what you want to achieve with your experiment. So again, there is no standard answer. Like there is no wrong or right answer about which kind of approach you want to take. It all depends on what you want to measure. So what I want to see in your planning is that you have already thought about this very carefully and you have made choices that make sense. And that's why you need to explain why you made each choice. So each of these choices that you're making, how many sessions, how many participants, how to divide them, you need to explain in your plan why you made all of these decisions. Okay, so this is again very important. So there's shortage in time, there's shortage in money, so you cannot do everything that you would like to do. Maybe your prototype is not as functional as you would like it to be. Maybe you don't have any as many participants as you want. But in the plan, you have all the freedom. So you make the plan, and then you can say in there, in an ideal world, if you have all the resources you need, how you are going to do the test. And then you explain, however, because we don't have enough time, actually, for this course, we are going to limit the test to this many participants, right? There should also be a subsection about the test participants. So how did you find them? Where did you collect them? How many participants are you going to get? But very importantly, you need to say how these the participants that you have fit the target group. So if your system is designed for senior citizens that cannot walk very well, and you're testing it on students, some colleagues of yours, then you need to justify why you have chosen these participants. Okay, and again, limitations can be that you don't have access to senior citizens, there is no time, but you need to explain here exactly what would be the ideal group of participants that you would like to have, and what are you actually going to do in your experiments. Where are you going to do the experiment? We talked about this. You can do it here in the lab, or you can do it actually on the field. So the example we gave was that doing it in the train station. This would be the realistic setting, but then there are limitations. You can do it in the lab. It's very controlled, but then you need to simulate the train platform. So explain how you're going to do it, and then why you made those choices. And then the equipment that you're going to use. So if you're using cameras, if you're using special sensors, if you're collecting special data with your prototype, this will be also the place where you can mention this information. I would like you to include the questionnaires that you're going to give the participants also in your plan. Usually there will be a questionnaire to fill before the experiment starts, and there you can collect some general information about age, gender, experience with internet, experience with smartwatches, all this kinds of information that will help you maybe later on filter your data, maybe compare males to females, maybe compare old people to young people, or have different age classes and see which one performs best with your prototype. And then you do the experiment, you have your measurements, and then maybe you want to measure something after the experiment, like the example we gave with the charity, how much more they would like to give for charitable causes. So the way to measure this is that you have them fill in a questionnaire after they finish the experiment, and then you collect the data from them like that. Also, if you want to measure user satisfaction, So when they are using your application, you are measuring the time, how many mistakes they make. But then if you want to get their opinion about your prototype, in the questionnaire after the experiment is done, you ask them, how do you like this system? I like it a lot, to I don't like it though. So this part is for the planning of the test. This all you have to do before you start the test, because you need to have the questionnaires ready before you start the test. You need to know how many groups you're going to have, how many participants, where you're going to do the test. All of this needs to be prepared before. All of this you need to write before the 19th, right? So this part is the plan of your test. And then we will go into what you will do after your experiment is done. So then you will get some results. So in the report, there will be a results section where you're going to write all the results that you're going to get. So all the numbers you have collected, all the measurements, all the comments that the participants have given you, everything that you have collected in your study. If you have too much information that you cannot put everything inside the report, so if like the results will take 2 pages, 2 full pages, this will be too long. So what you will do is that you will summarize everything and maybe in a table or in a figure, but I would like you to include all the results in a what do you call this? Beilache, so it's appendix. So we will include it in an appendix, Beilache, at the end of the report, include everything. Don't worry about wasting paper. I will not print any of your reports, even if it's 100 pages. Just include it in the end, and then I will have a look at it. It's important also to make meaningful figures. So you have all these results. There's lots of numbers that you will include in the appendix in the end, but you will. It will be much more easier for the reader to understand what's happening in your results if you have a figure that illustrates this. We will talk more about this in the next lecture. But there, of course, after an experiment, you need to have some figures to visualize the results. Okay, so you have these results, you collect all these numbers, and then from these numbers, we want to have answers to our research questions. So before we get these answers, we need to analyze the results. So you can mention each set of numbers that you have collected and then immediately analyze what does this mean. Sometimes you want to have it in a separate section. One section only numbers, and then one section is like the analysis of these numbers. Up to you. I prefer to merge them together, but people also recommend that you keep them separate, so it's also there's a clear distinction for the reader. The idea of the analysis is that you can go towards meaningful conclusions from your results. So you have these numbers, and then you have these research questions that you have. How do you go from these numbers to the research question? Okay, so we measure the Google Maps, we measure the what was it again? The Fietsersbund.nl, and then the times from the Google Maps are always less than half of the time of the Fietsersbund. Therefore, it's clear that the Google Maps is more easy to use, right? Something like this. So you're already looking at the numbers, you're thinking, and you're guiding your the reader in what you're thinking in the reasoning, that's going through your brain to go from these numbers to the conclusion. And this will be the place where the reader can be like, hey, I completely agree with this because this makes sense. Or the reader can be like, oh, this is total nonsense. I don't agree with this. The numbers are correct, but I don't agree with what these researchers are doing to reach these conclusions. So you have to be really convincing in the way you analyze the data. So explain exactly how you're thinking. You can refer to the figures. So when you made the results, you also added the figures. And then, we added the bar charts when we did the experiment. So the bars are always higher and the Fietsersbund always shorter on the Google Maps. So if you just refer to the figure where the result is very clear to see, then it's also very good support for your conclusion. let's see. If you can, if it's possible, you can have multiple measurements to back up each of your conclusions. So for example, for efficiency, we talked about measuring time, and then the shorter the time, the more efficient the application is, because you're reaching the same goal with a shorter amount of time. But what you can also measure is how many clicks or how many tabs does it take in order to reach the desired goal. So you have the time that you spend, and also you have the number of clicks. And then again, if it takes more clicks, then it's less efficient. If it takes only one click to get the result, then your app is very efficient. And then this was what's called a triangulation. So from multiple sources of data, you reach the same conclusion. The problem, of course, will be if one measurement tells you that this one is better, and the other measurement tells you that the other prototype is better, and then you have something to explain to the user, to the reader. Yes. But hopefully, all your measurements, if you've done them properly, they will lead to the same conclusion. And also, if the data is not very clear, you also have to mention here that, okay, it's not we cannot get any strong conclusions from this data. You should also mention this here. I will talk about this more in the following lecture about analyzing the results. Okay, now that you have done the analysis of the results, you have these numbers, and then you already kind of talked about what these numbers mean and what conclusions can we get from each of these measurements. The following section is the most important section of your report, which is the conclusions. You're basically going to go through your analysis and then get the main conclusions from these analyses and put them in a very short form in your conclusions section. So here you are summarizing the conclusions of your analysis. Make sure that there is no new conclusions or surprises that are not mentioned in your analysis, because the conclusions is basically the summary of your whole analysis section. So if there is any findings that you have or ideas that you have, you should mention them already in your analysis and then just summarize them in the conclusions. The conclusions should not have any new information. And keep it as short as possible. Just mention the most important main conclusions of your analysis. And I should actually mention it here, but it's not here. You should have per sub-question. So you will mention in your conclusions every sub-question and the answer for each sub-question. And then from these sub-questions, you will also go to the main question and then have the answer to the main question. Right? This should be part of your conclusion section here. You can repeat some numbers from your analysis section. So if there's a very important number, so for example, our new system is 10 times as fast as the older system, then you can also repeat this number here in the conclusions, just to because it's such an important finding. Keep in mind that when people, so maybe not now, but in the future, if you're writing something for a report for your company, and then you give it to the management team, the manager will not read your report from the cover to the cover. The management team will get your report. They will have a quick look at your introduction and then immediately flip to the conclusions. And then it's nice to have in the conclusions like hey, our system is 10 times as fast. And probably that will be the end of it. They will be like, well, this looks good. And then they will throw your report away. If they are really, really interested, then they will be like, hey, 10 times as fast, this looks like a bit exaggerated. Then they will start looking in your analysis and be like, that's how they measured it. Well, okay, that makes sense. Or be like, oh, these guys are like trying to trick me. It's not 10 times as fast. They have measured it the wrong way, or their analysis doesn't make sense. So that's why also you need to make sure that your analysis is also understandable. But most people, like the majority, will only read the conclusion section. After the conclusion section, you have the recommendations. This is optional, but it's also, now that you have done the experiment, you have reached these conclusions, you're now kind of an expert on the topic. It will be really nice to also give some recommendations, like, hey, we have designed this new feature and we have tested it. It kind of worked, but not exactly the way we wanted. Our recommendation for future efforts that try to do the same thing, maybe try to implement this feature in this other way, like maybe adjust it in something. Maybe like, hey, our test didn't exactly measure what we were trying to test because we didn't plan it very well. We recommend if someone tries to repeat this test, they make sure that they do this thing that we have forgotten to do. Because now you have experience in the project, you have done it, you spent like 2 months on it, you have a lot to say about the topic. So it's good that you can give recommendations for people who are going to do the same thing in the future. So for example, if your test participants did not fit the target group well, then you can advise what better test participants should fit better to your experiment. What you would have done differently if you're looking back. Now that you know how the system is performing, what other changes to the system would you suggest? Because you have been working with it for such a long time. And if you already answered the main questions that you had, but you also have other questions that you couldn't fit in your experiment. So what other questions are also very important that you didn't test that the people that are doing the next experiment with this system can try? And then it's also for people who want to do research, it's very easy for them then to use your experience. They immediately look at your conclusions and recommendations section. They see what you found and say, oh, but we really want, it would be really nice if someone can measure this. And we're like, hey, we have our research question already prepared for us. Then they can continue your work, and then they can measure something that you already have told them that's very important. And this will be the last part of your report. So again, this is how the test report looks like. These are all the sections that you need to write. You have no explanation of exactly what you need to write for each section. This is recorded, and we are going to put the recordings on the blackboard. So when you're writing your report, you can also listen to the explanation so you know exactly what you need to write. And so this is the whole test report, but these 2 parts are what you need to write in the test plan. So this is the exact same slide I also showed last time, but nobody paid attention. In the plan, you don't need to write about your introduction or your project description, results and conclusions you don't have now. So of course you cannot write anything about it. You need to write your research questions, sub-questions, measurement questions, and you need to talk about the planning. And the planning, again, is the most important part of this whole story. So spend some time, think carefully about how you're going to do it, and submit it by midnight of the 19th. On the 20th, when we sit here together, I'm going to open my email and I'm going to sit with you and discuss these plans. And the email you will need to send to is this. So yeah, it looks very strange, but this is my email. It works. So hal@hhs.nl. And the deadline is midnight on the 19th. So the evening of the 19th on the 20th. That's it. Any questions? Okie dokie. So we have some time. So the students that did not have their research questions prepared last time and would like to discuss their research questions, now is the chance. I'm available for the next, I think, like half an hour or something. We can look into that. So the group who didn't discuss anything with me before, they have priority. If I'm done with all these, then the groups we already discussed and they also have other questions, then they also have a chance to ask questions. Okay? Thank you very much.